I knew that to get me over the line to get published, I had to have a beautifully designed cover that would just
Mm.
get me through the process of finishing and doing the inside of the book. I'd paid you some money, I'd briefed you, and
Yeah.
so sometimes it's making a commitment to other people outside of your own little writing hole that makes you go over the line, get over the line to sort of get things published.
All right. So today's guest is CAROLYN TATE. CAROLYN is an author and coach based in Melbourne who helps others find their purpose in life and work. CAROLYN is also a keen river swimmer, which is something we have in common, ecofeminist and nature lover, all of which are prominent themes in her work. CAROLYN and I worked together on the cover of her most recent book, which is called Brave Women Write: On Facing Grief, Finding Hope, and Freeing the Writer Within. She's also written books on writing, marketing, and finding purpose, all of which will be very relevant to our listeners. So, welcome, CAROLYN.
Hi, Holly. Thank you for the invitation.
I wanted to start off just having a wee chat about your marketing background, because I know that's something that you've written a couple of books on. You did the Dummy's Guide to Marketing Your Small Business, and another, I think, was it an independently published one as well?
My first book was a self-published book called
Right.
Small Business Big Brand. That was in
Mm,
2007, and then I
yeah.
also wrote Conscious Marketing in 2013. So yeah,
Mm,
3 books
yeah.
on the subject of marketing.
So you come from a marketing background. Did you work with a marketing agency?
No, I actually I worked in banking when I left school, and then towards the end of my career in banking, I worked in the marketing area of the bank. So I spent quite a number of years in marketing roles. That was when I also got my qualifications part time in marketing, and then when I left the bank, I started my own marketing consultancy. So I was teaching marketing, but I was also doing marketing project management, a lot of communications, writing, all of those sorts of things. So in total, I probably have spent about 15 years of my career in the marketing space, and then 10 years ago I kind of shifted more to purpose and storytelling and writing and other things. So yeah, probably about 15 years in total in the marketing space.
Is there a lot of overlap with the marketing stuff and what you're doing now?
Yeah, definitely. I think many companies who recruit me to work on purpose, and it's very often a marketing person that is looking at how do we articulate our company purpose, how do we use that to drive our marketing and our communications, and then also it comes from the people and culture side. They're very interested in helping people, find meaning in the workplace, and so it's very often a people and a marketing kind of function purpose, and so I've been sort of doing that for about the last 10 years. Is specifically working in the space with businesses around articulating purpose and how they use that to drive the people function and also the marketing function of the business.
What would you say is your purpose then? How do you define that?
Well, I kind of feel like purpose evolves for all of us, and
Of
my
course.
purpose really is much more moving sort of towards um, writing and sharing stories that kind of remake the world for women particularly, and also for Mother Earth. So I'm shifting out of that kind of business space and much more into the writing space, and writing books that are kind of going to be helpful for women and also helpful for the environment, Mother Nature, and so on. So yeah, it's shifted. My purpose has shifted, and I think we also have lots of purposes. And I like to think of things as being purposeful projects rather than one wholly like God-given purpose. And I don't believe
Yeah.
in the religious side of things, but like there's a lot of hoo-ha around purpose. It's like you've got to find that one thing you can't not do, and you've got to do it for the rest of your life, and come hell or high water. I'm not that way inclined. I talk about purpose as being something that changes, that you can have many purposes, and that purpose is really about doing something that's meaningful to us, but it also has to be of consequence to others. And that's very often the thing that's missing for a lot of people, is they're doing stuff that is meaningful potentially to them, but maybe questioning whether what they're doing is actually having any positive impact in the world. So I
Mm,
think that's often the missing link for many people, is feeling like their work is making a positive impact. Yeah, and I also really think that as a creative, we can't do that one thing and only stick to one thing. I think creatives, as a writer, I've written 6 books now, but my next 3 writing projects are all vastly different. What
mm,
connects them, though, is that they are about supporting women and they are about Mother Nature. So I kind of have this broad remit purpose, but I have to have lots of different purposeful projects under that broad remit, if that makes sense. And creatives are
mm.
terrible at just doing one thing, and we're not meant to be doing one thing. I don't think as humans we want to be curious. We want to be exploring new things. We want to learn new things, and we want to be able to take on new projects, and new ideas. And I think that purposeful projects is kind of where I've got to on this whole thing about purpose, is making sure they fit a broad remit of what it is that you want to achieve in the world and in your life. Thinking of as projects which takes the heat off it having to be completely successful, like an experiment. Just have a go at something, see how it goes. Oh, that feels good, do some more of it. Oh, that feels right, do some more of it. And even if there are hurdles, it's a good test. If you've got obstacles or things that will block you from pursuing that particular purposeful project, if you keep going, then it's also a sign that you're on the right path. But yeah, I think life is really a series of purposeful projects that really ignite our heart and our mind, but also we feel like we're doing them because they're going to be of value and of service to the world beyond ourselves, our own lives.
Absolutely. And that's something that as writers, we're always thinking about who we're writing for, but also there is something deeply cathartic in the process of writing, especially if you're doing it in a very creative way.
I think the act of writing is, it's a creative process.
Yeah.
Writing to music, with music, writing in nature, with nature, writing outside of our, 4 walls of our office, writing in a beautiful creative space. I think that life is meant to be a creative act. And so often we lose that attachment to creativity. We got it knocked out of us as kids. We can't sing,
Mm.
we can't paint, we can't draw, we can't write. And so we somehow believe that that's true and end up working in an office and doing work that might pay well but doesn't fulfill our innate creative desires. And so part of the process of purposeful projects, I think, and in the writing act, is to unleash our creativity and to be prepared to be a novice and to get it wrong and to be a child again. Almost, it's kind of like going back to your childlike state very often, because we were born creative, but somehow along. And we were born curious, and I think curiosity and creativity are 2 things that many of us, just lose over our lifetime, sadly.
I'm not sure that it's that we lose it necessarily, but I think it's that we gain more inhibitions along the way that sort of block that creativity and that curiosity. That as you go through high school, it's no longer cool to be curious about things, or at a certain point, you become far more self-conscious about drawing and putting your work on the internet or showing other people what you're doing. So as you
Mm.
sort of gain more knowledge, and you start comparing yourself to others more and more, it becomes more difficult to be creative.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned comparing ourselves to others. I mean, that's the death of creativity, I think, um, is that whenever we compare ourselves to others, which is inevitably celebrities or people beyond our kind of day to day life, or even people in our day to day life, comparison, it's like the thief of joy. I think it's been said that that because we can't be as good as somebody else, we won't do it, or we might do it but hide it and not show anyone our
Yeah.
work. But the interesting thing is, I had my son Billy 25 years ago. I had no idea how to be a mother. I just did it, and
And I don't think anyone
and
does.
there was no guidebook. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you used to compare yourself as well, but you just did it. Being a mother, working, being a professional, there's so many things that we do, but for some do in our lives, and we have to be a novice, and we're prepared to get it wrong because we just have to do it. But for
Mm.
some reason, when it comes to the creative act, we're not prepared to be a novice, or we're not prepared to not be very good at it. And I think for me, even in my own life, every time I write another book, I just say, get it out there. It doesn't matter if it sells 5 or 5,000, just get it out there, because this might lead to the next book, which will be a bestseller, or the next one that, they might never be a bestseller, but the more you create, the better you become. And I talk about the idea of your right to learn and learn to write, like the way you writing, the more you write, the more you learn, right? You can read
Absolutely.
books on writing, you can read books on fiction, you can read so many things. And I read a lot because good writers are good readers. But for some reason, when it comes to the creative act, if we're not really good at it, we kind of feel like we shouldn't be doing it. And
Mm.
the opposite's probably true.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's so wise. And even if you write a book and don't publish it and move on to the next one, that purely the act of writing is going to make you better. And I think there's this expectation as well that first
Mm.
drafts of work should be like the finished product. And I kind of see that first
Mm.
draft as being, I mean, that's only the very first stepping stone, but it's really hard mentally and emotionally to get over that, putting out something that is, or creating something that is subpar, but has to by its nature be subpar for you to then get to the next stage. I think of it a bit like when I'm drawing my initial thumbnails for book covers. I should share some of these on Instagram actually, because they're absolutely incomprehensible. They're just little scribbles looking at the composition, the overall look of something. And I that's not something that I would share with a client because it doesn't make any sense. You refine it and you refine it, and then at a certain point you share it for feedback, and then you go back and refine it again. And I think it's much the same in
Yeah.
writing. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. It's a process, and it's a practice. And one thing, I was just on a call with a woman who's writing her first book, and she's written about 10,000 words, and she said, I'm stuck. And it was really getting to the end of the first draft, because for me, that is getting the biggest hurdle in writing a book, is getting to the end of the first draft.
Mm. Yep.
Once you've got through the end of the first draft, it's kind of like, well, I can't waste all that time I spent on writing that book and not publish it, right?
Mm.
So getting to that first draft. So I wrote my book in Brave Women Write, the first draft in 90 days. And I feel like that is kind of, it's a good process. I don't suggest that everyone do that, but it has worked for me. And in numerous occasions, and it's getting to that first draft, no matter how bad it is. It's like quantity over quality in the first draft, and then take a break from it, and then go back and do, the second draft. Always doing the second draft yourself. It's not the right
Mm.
time after the first draft to hand it off to someone else. That's how
Exactly.
I work. Um, the second draft has to be your own, and potentially the third, and maybe there's 4 drafts or 5 drafts, 6 drafts or 7 drafts. I've got a friend who's on version 7 draft of her book. But at some point you have to hand it over and give it to someone else.
Yeah.
And which was much like when I worked with you, Holly, to get the cover done. I think
Mm.
I hadn't finished the second draft. I think when you started the design,
Ah.
but I'd engaged you to go through that process. Or I hadn't done the third draft. It was in edit mode. I'd done the second draft, but I knew that to get me over the line to get published, I had to have a beautifully designed cover that would just
Mm.
get me through the process of finishing and doing the inside of the book. I'd paid you some money, I'd briefed you, and so
Yeah.
sometimes it's making a commitment to other people outside of your own little writing hole that makes you go over the line, get over the line to sort of get things published. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that was having to design the book. Cover was definitely part of like, well, I can't go back now. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
I can't retreat.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think once you've put a bit of money on the line as well, it's like, okay, we got to go forward with this. And sometimes, depending on your personality, some people can just do it themselves without that external motivation. But I think it depends on what kind of personality you have, and having a bit of accountability is definitely helpful. I want to kind of pivot a little bit, and we will get on to some more of the kind of maybe slightly more esoteric stuff about the writing and nature and inspiration. But first, I just wanted to go back to the sort of the marketing side of things, and ask you about what you've done to market your own book. I know I've had a look at over your website, and obviously you have a business in on doing the coaching, and so that it all sort of ties in together. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit on what you did specifically for this book.
Well, I had a launch, so I
Yep.
had 60 women who came to a launch, personally invited, which was lovely, and we celebrated and we did storytelling on the night. That was the launch. I'm very lucky. I have a writers group, 5 women who we're all just wonderful support for each other, and they're kind of the fuel behind the words, and it wouldn't have been published if it wasn't for them urging me to get it out and get it into the world. So we have a writers group that encourages us to do that. I did a launch. I initially sold the book on Ingram Spark only, so I was wanting to build one-on-one relationships with my readers and started a mailing list. So I really wanted to have a personal relationship with women, to try and help them, because the book Brave Women Write is really about helping women find their voice and write their story.
Mm.
I feel like we've been fed a diet of men's story. History is called his story for a reason. It's maybe a bit of a cliche, but we need more her stories to rebalance the past and bring more connection to. We really do need more women's stories, and not just famous women's stories. So I've connected with a lot of women who's want to write the stories of their grandmothers, which is one of the books that I want to write as a novel. So
Mm.
I think I've tried to market and um, create this book as a gift to women to help them find their voice and tell their story and write their story, whether it's their own or an ancestor's story, or whether it's another woman's story, because I feel like women's stories matter. So I've really tried to create a personal connection. Um, One of the other things that I've done is I've started on Fridays a Brave Women Writers Circle. I love the notion of circles and stuff, and that's just a free circle where women can come along and get supported. I give them writing tasks and ideas. We do a writing Pomodoro, which is 25 minutes of writing. So I'm trying to build personal relationships with my readers. So they get emails, and they get invitations to things. I'm about to move to a farm we have moved to a farm in Red Hill, which is 10 acres, and it's my intention to run writing retreats for women
Oh,
um,
wonderful.
down the track. once the place is renovated and ready to receive visitors. And I do mentoring as well. I offer support to women who want to write their story within 90
Mm.
days. Um, I I originally only published on Ingram Spark, and then I decided to publish on Amazon and all other platforms. So
Mm.
it's now selling on all the online bookstores and things. I'm doing a lot of, like you and I now are doing podcasts. So
Mm.
I'm reaching out to other women authors because I think women authors need to support women authors. So I've been reaching out to other female authors who I love and admire, and we've been swapping books and talking to each other about our books and sharing on social media. LinkedIn has been the biggest connection.
Oh, interesting.
Definitely has been the greatest platform for me to market and to meet interesting people. I don't just post my stuff on LinkedIn. I make comments on other women's posts, particularly other women's authors, other people who are definitely doing work that's inspiring women, and also nature connection. There's not a lot of nature stuff on LinkedIn, interestingly.
No.
So LinkedIn is probably my best and most prolific platform. So I do have other social channels, but I'm probably not that good at them, sadly. But definitely loving LinkedIn. Offering myself for speaking gigs. So there's quite a few different sort of marketing activities, and the writers group and I, we're always lament about how easy it is to write a book and publish it and how hard it is to market it. Even
Oh,
if you get
yes.
published with a publishing house,
Absolutely.
the marketing of the book is the hardest thing, and it's relentless. You've got to keep doing it.
Hmm.
But with my last book, The Purpose Project, I sold 10,000 copies of that over the years, which is
Wow.
quite a number of books. But
Yeah.
the way I sold it was part of a consulting package. So a company would come to me and they'd want me to do some consulting or some coaching or workshops. And then as part of that, I would sell the book as well. So having a service that includes the book is also a really powerful way to get your book out there and marketed too.
That is really smart, and that only applies to a certain sector of our audience, I suppose, for
Yeah,
who are writing nonfiction or writing a book to go alongside a business. But I think
yeah,
that's really smart, and it's interesting to hear you say how difficult marketing is, especially when you come from a marketing background, because I think like everybody is going to relate to that, because I published a children's picture book a few years back. I self-published it, and basically I did it as an experiment, because I was working as a sort of marketing consultant at a self-publishing company at the time, and I wanted to sort of go, okay, I want to try this myself. I want to put myself in the shoes of those people that I'm helping, and so I wrote this little book. The marketing side of it was definitely the hardest, and by the time I'd finished, had the finished book in my hands, I was kind of a bit tired of the whole thing and wanted to move on to the next project. And I think that's the experience that a lot of
mm-hmm.
authors have, is that they go, oh, now I have to market the thing. So I do think having having it sort of built into the whole process is really a key part of it.
Yeah,
And I mean, you can start
yeah,
marketing at any point along the road. I'm not saying that authors who have already published a book can't start marketing now, but I do think it helps if you start sort of at the beginning of your writing process, if you can start sharing sort of what your works in progress, and it helps, especially if you're using social media, to just gain a little bit of interest in what it is you're doing. So I think if I went back and did the same
mm,
thing again, I would do it quite differently. Maybe I should do a YouTube video about about what I would do differently if I were to do it
Mhm.
again. But the thing is, you learn through every
Yeah,
process you do, and every book you put out is going to be a bit different. And you learn about the marketing just
yeah.
as you learn about the writing.
Every book is going to obviously have a different marketing approach, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, or whatever. But I feel like we've got to fall in love with marketing. It's almost like we've got to do marketing that feels good to us, because I think, which is why I wrote Conscious Marketing, because we're so sick of unconscious binge marketing and the noise and the clutter. And there's so much stuff out there. You just have to look at a LinkedIn link, and it's just a lot of it's just so banal, and it's very hard to cut through. And
Mm,
and I kind of feel like books need a unique marketing. If you're not being published, they need something unique, which is why I decided I was going to try and create a community of brave women writers. I didn't want to create a book that which is very different, isn't it? Like with
mm,
book distribution, it's normally, well, how many books can we get in the hands of people? And you become a bestseller because you sell, you know, New York Times bestseller by selling, 1 million books or whatever it is. And like that kind of fame with my book has never ever appealed to me. I've never written a book because I want to sell 1 million copies. Financially, I'd quite like that, but I
yeah.
don't do like it's kind of about understanding what your purpose is for writing. Why am I writing this book? And do I want to build a community around this book? And do I want to see that a woman who's read my book has been able to write her own book and then has been able to share that with our community? And then, so I think it's reframing and marketing and community. To me, community it's that is everything. Human
Mm.
connection, and post COVID, it's even more important. And I know we're doing this online, but I would love nothing more than be having a cuppa and flicking through the book together and
Oh,
talking
I
about your children's
know.
book. And
I know.
I feel I feel like we've kind of lost that human connection. And so for me, one of the purposes for writing Brave Women Write was to create a community of women who are writing their stories. And so whether that's 500 women that buy the book and join that community, or whether it's 5,000, it's that's not relevant. It's whether someone reads the book and actually then writes a story and can say, I read this book, I was part of this community, it inspired me to find my voice and write my story. So I think when we can reframe the way we look at marketing, it's not just sticking an ad on Facebook trying to promote your book.
Yeah,
It's about, why are we writing the book, and what is the impact that we want to have in the world with it, and what is the best way to do that. And for me, it always comes back to community.
I love that so much. Yeah, it makes an awful lot of sense, and I like to talk about even before you start writing a book, figuring out who your audience is, and who you're
Yes.
writing to. And obviously for you, you've got a very, I mean, it's in the subtitle of your book, you've got a very specific target reader and writer, of
Mhm.
it's about this experience of using writing to work through grief. And so when somebody
Mhm.
sees that book and sees that subtitle, that your ideal reader is going to go, oh, this book was written for me. Which is exactly the response you want. And yes, it will appeal to other
Yeah.
people. Maybe they're not, maybe they're writers, and maybe they're not writing through grief necessarily, or maybe that's not their primary motivator to write. But it will appeal to other people outside of that niche as well.
Mm. Yeah, and look, talking about that word grief, we're all we all, grief is in all of us.
Absolutely.
Grief around environmental degradation, plastic in the oceans. Like, if we're really connected to the world, then we should, sorry, I don't want to use the word should, then grief is inside all of us.
Mm,
And if we can tap into that, whether it's universal grief or private grief, there's an amazing book I refer to in the opening chapter, which is Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. Grief
mm,
is incredible fuel for writing, and I think that tapping into universal grief or private grief, or because the opposite of grief is joy, right? And it's like, kind of like, you can't have joy if you don't have grief. And we're not going
mm.
to go down a rabbit hole on grief, but it is fabulous fuel for writing. I talk about grief stoke is the place where you stoke the bonfire of your words. You're kind of stoking a bonfire with grief, and your words are the result of that. And um, it's a creative fuel. It's incredible what can come from writing from a space of grief. And in the book, I don't necessarily write about the grief. I actually write about the process of writing and how it's helped me with that grief.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I allude to it, but I don't kind of go down a rabbit hole. And it was cathartic. In writing this book, I was able to move on and get over my grief. And it was about the end of a relationship. And grief comes in all forms and sizes and so on. So I feel like we all have grief in us, whether it's acknowledged or unacknowledged. I mean, I live in Australia. The grief around our First Nations people and colonisation, and there's so much grief. When it's accessed, is actually can be healed, but also writing is kind of like the pathway for us to kind of process or work with the grief, or to make sense of it, I guess.
That's such an interesting perspective, because I think when a lot of us think about grief, we think about death, and we think of it in a very sort of black and
Mm,
white way. Yes, grief is about death, but death also comes in many different forms, whether it's the death of the environment, the death of a way of a life, the death of culture. In the case of COVID,
mm,
the death, obviously literal death, but also the death of connection.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah, the disconnection that we have from nature. Like, I
Mm.
realized in me, a large part of my grief was living my whole life disconnected from the natural world, disconnected from nature. Sure,
Yeah.
spending time in walking in nature or hiking or whatever, but not truly feeling a part of nature.
What was it that flicked that switch then for you? Because I think a lot of people, well, certainly when I think about connection to nature, I would also be thinking about like walking in nature, being, in physical nature. Is there a sort of deeper level there?
Yeah, totally. Like, we are nature. I think I never
Mm.
realized that we are nature. Thich Nhat Hanh um, talks about the idea of interbeing, that we are nature, and that, and I know Johann Hari, who wrote Lost Connections, it's a book about mental health and depression and anxiety and its causes. And he talks about the fact that there's 9 causes of mental health issues, only 2 of which are biological, and the other 7 are due to unmet human needs. And one of
Interesting.
those, interestingly, is lack of purpose. And the other one, interestingly, is our disconnection from the natural world, from nature. We are disconnected, or we wouldn't be doing the atrocious forestry and logging and, carbon emissions and all the things that are happening around the world. If we were connected to nature, we just simply wouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely.
But it's for me, my pivotal. I hate that word pivot, but like, my point of connecting, realizing that I was disconnected from nature, was in the process of writing Brave Women Write, where I would go out when I had blocks for writing, and I'd spend my time in nature. I also, incidentally, at the same time, happened to start river swimming, 10-minute walk from home on the Birrarung, which is the Yarra River here in Melbourne, and I started swimming. And when you're swimming, it was 8 degrees, freezing the first day that I swam. And you're realizing when you're swimming that I am a part of this river. If this river is hurting, I am hurting. If I'm hurting, the river is hurting. You realize that what's happening in the natural world is also happening in us as humans. And so there was the swimming, and then I spent some time in a little cabin in Warburton, which is about an hour's drive from Melbourne, and it's a beautiful nature-filled area. And every day I was getting up, swimming in the river, and I was in the other end of so it's a fair way from where I was swimming in Melbourne, but I was swimming in another sort of a leg of the river, and writing in nature, like actually writing in and with nature, adopting things like sit spots. So I would sit for 30 minutes each day in nature and come back and do automatic journaling about what I'd observed in nature, the birds and the trees and so on.
Mm.
And then I did a nature-based leadership training course, which really made me realize, and there was a lot of grief in that too, Holly, to realize that
Mm.
I had spent I'm 60 this year, but I'd spent 58 years of my life basically being disconnected to Mother Earth,
Mm.
appreciating her and enjoying her, but not realizing that I am nature.
Mm.
And so that is evident even through the process of writing Brave Women Write. The more I write, the more nature themes come through the actual book. And the 3 projects I've got on the go, 2 are now about nature. One's about the river, and another one is about the farm and being connected to nature there. And the other one's about women. It's about my grandmother.
Mm.
So it was just sort of like all these little signs. So there's probably not one pivotal moment. There's just this realization of like, yeah, this realization that nature is our purpose, like Earth is our purpose, really.
Mm.
So, yeah, I feel like a complete apprentice and novice. I've got a lot of friends and peers now in the nature-based leadership course who are learning how to make fire from, drill sticks and all sorts of weaving baskets out of natural fibers, and like that real deep connection to nature. And part of that for me was acknowledging the grief of that disconnection that I'd had. And so,
Mm.
yeah, I'm on a journey now to be writing books that sort of combine the connection of women and nature and Mother Earth.
I love how you've spoken about the swimming side of things, because I mean that is something I could talk about all day, and uh, and especially when you said that the first time you swam it was 8 degrees. It's quite difficult to explain how very cold that actually is to somebody who hasn't experienced it. It's the kind of cold where you feel like thousands of needles are pricking your skin, but in a good way.
Yeah,
It sounds horrible, but you never feel more alive than when you're in very cold water.
you're red like a lobster and there's just a tingle all over your body. And it lasts
Yeah.
for hours. So I try not to come home and have a hot shower afterwards, because the tingle and the aliveness in your body lasts for hours.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't wait to come over and visit you
Oh,
and have a
yes.
swim
Yeah,
where you are.
absolutely. I actually find it's so instrumental in my creativity, whether it's thinking about new
Mm,
design ideas or blog posts I can write, or yeah, podcast ideas. Like so many different things come to me when I'm swimming. The trouble is like keeping them in my head. I don't know if you find this, but I find that
yeah.
when I'm in the water, you're in such a sort of I guess flow state that your the ideas will come into my head and they'll just float off again. It's very much like when people describe meditation, and that's something I've always struggled to find just sitting by myself. But being in water almost throws you into
Hmm.
um, that situation where you're so sort of
Mm.
focused and
It's
present,
heightened.
yeah, you're so aware of your surroundings. What I like about open water swimming as well, rather than being in a pool, is that you're not having to turn at each end. I like to just go and swim in a straight line, hopefully a straight line, and yeah,
Mm.
your head just sort of clears, and it's amazing.
Yes, yeah, and it gave birth to, so even by the act of swimming has given birth to one of the writing project that I'm working on about the river.
Mm,
So, I think it's also got to do with that notion of curiosity and creativity we were talking about. Like when you're curious and do things that you haven't done before, you just don't know where it will lead. Like it can lead to all sorts of amazing discoveries, but also it can lead to whole projects like it has for me. So I think it's a lot about really sort of being curious, like curiosity. And so I was curious. I didn't know that I would continue to do it. I don't know how many swims I've done now, but hundreds. And
mm,
so, yeah, it kind of, that initial curiosity, it wasn't that I knew on the first swim that I was going to do it for, make it a lifelong hobby or passion. But it was just doing it and then realizing, hey, this is great. And so then going back again and then again and then
absolutely.
again. And before you know it, you're hooked.
And you've found quite a community around it as well, haven't you?
Yes, there's a bunch of us. We're called the Yarra Yabbies, and we swim on a regular basis. I'm dying to go back. I haven't been for some time because I'm in transition at the moment, and I'm moving back. But yeah, when it's not happening, you really do miss it.
Mm.
It's something that I wake up each morning and think, I wish I was there. I have been swimming in the ocean, but yeah, not the river.
Yeah,
So
do miss
any
it.
body of water. My partner jokes that I'd swim in a puddle, and I probably would if it was
Yeah.
deep enough.
It's not easy getting into cold water. And, even if
No.
like logically, you love it, there's always that mental barrier of actually getting in. And I think that's something that
Hmm.
for me has been so helpful for my mental health, but also my resilience as a human being. That I'm
Mm,
going out and I'm doing something difficult. Doing
mm,
that one thing
yeah,
that's difficult, you kind of feel like you're better equipped to do other things that are difficult in life.
yeah. And I kind of feel like, Holly, that's kind of metaphorical, isn't it?
Mm,
It's like life, isn't it?
absolutely.
We getting in the water even when it's cold and uncomfortable, and it's for you don't know um, whether you're going to make it home without your toes dropping off. It's like it's like writing a book, isn't it? Like that you're plowing on through your comfort zone and revealing things about yourself that you wouldn't otherwise have thought would ever be revealed. The more you write, the more you're busting through these barriers and jumping into an unknown river, a cold river very often. So, that idea of stepping into cold water is a metaphor for stepping into uncharted territory with your writing and any other projects that you might be working on.
For sure. Well, I think that might be a sort of natural place to wrap things up. That was such a fascinating conversation. I feel like we've covered quite a lot of different topics there. But obviously, your books are something that be very useful to our listeners out there. So where can people go to find you on the internet?
To my website,
Yeah,
carolyntate.co.
lovely.
Um, and yeah, all my books and things are there. And Brave Women Writes on there as well. And yeah, the more people that sharing their story, writing their story, connecting to nature, would
Absolutely.
be wonderful. I just wanted to kind of end by saying, from my end, how book cover design is so vital. And without a beautiful book cover design, people won't pick your book up, and I just get so many compliments on the cover
Oh,
design,
so good to hear.
and I feel so proud of it. It's probably the proudest I felt of any of my books, actually, and
Oh,
it
wow.
inspires me. I often give my book away to women that I feel that need it, or
Mm,
if I've been somewhere, like I went to an event last week, it was a free event put on by a really lovely woman, and I really enjoyed it. And so I thought, I'm going to just post this book to her and say thank you. And so I've done that.
Mm.
And so that's the other part of the book. I feel like your design is a gift to me because it makes me feel so proud of my book. And I feel very inspired to want to share it. And regardless of whether someone goes on my website and buys it, I'm always looking for opportunities to share my work. And I think this is a great example of that, being able to share my work. But yeah, I just did want to give you a plug for
Oh, thank
how
you.
much I love my book cover.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. That's been very inspiring and also very practical. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thanks for the invitation.